Stewart refers to himself as an eco-social strategist after working a conventional career with assignments for IBM, Merrill Lynch, and several universities. In 2008, he gave up working for money and since has devoted himself through a series of volunteer staff initiatives to awakening humanity to the ecological and climate catastrophes that our growth economic system is creating. I want to ask how you've been doing, but I know it hasn't been the easiest road, and especially during this hard time of the pandemic. How have you weathered this time?
All I can say is I'm happy every day. As for the epidemic or the pandemic, as much as it is disturbing through all of the pain and suffering that I see is happening, I believe it's a gift to humanity in a certain way, because we were headed for over the falls, and the epidemic, the pandemic, has pulled us back from committing ourselves to self-destruction.
In Climate Matters TV, you've had Dr. James Hansen, you've had Greta Thunberg, you've had amazing professors, scientists, doctors, educators, and people in the climate movement, but also protesters. And you could probably tell us a lot more, but and a lot of religious leaders as well, very high up. And so you,
Very important part of the puzzle
yeah.
is the spiritual aspects of humanity, and I deal with those by bringing religious leaders and people who are, shall we say, associated with the secular religions of Earth. Humanism,
Yeah.
and you don't have to believe in a god or a deity, or Buddhism, which believes not in God or deity, but in mind, but it has a transcendental factor. And my synthesis of the problem, what was going wrong back in 2009, my epiphany was that humanity, through the secularization of society, has come to the point where we have an emptiness inside, okay? Where society created this emptiness because we're not encouraged, for many people, we're not encouraged to feel okay that we have divinity within us, that we're okay, we're complete. And so we've been trying to fill that void with stuff, with the stuff we own, with the stuff we do. And the advertising industry is more than willing to jump in and help us fill that void with, if you only buy our razor blades, then you will be yada, 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 or drink our beer and you'll get a girl like the one in the background of that advertisement staring at you. And we've got a problem, is that we don't realize we're okay the way we are. And one of the gifts, again, that this pandemic is giving us is it's giving us the opportunity to appreciate what we've got. And so we have to appreciate that. Consumerism is the dominant religion of Earth. And I call it a religion because it has the same aspects of believing in something on the authority of others, okay? And that belief is, you will be happy if you buy our stuff. And that's not true, because happiness doesn't come from the stuff you own or play with. Happiness comes from inside.
Yeah, it really does. And I'm glad that you really touch upon that. I want to bring out a couple more things. So the last time we physically saw each other was in November in COP25 in Madrid. And,
Yes.
and it was outside of your plenary room, or the room you were in. And you just finished doing a session with Dr. James Hansen. And you're also kind of a little feeling a little frail, had your wheelchair there, and but yet still going strong like you always do. Had Dr. James Hansen there, but it wasn't the first time. You actually had him, was it two other times before on
Yes.
the show?
And actually, through the fortuitous coincidences, if you say it in a secular way, and if you say it in a spiritual way, through arrangements from a higher power, after trying for years to get in touch with Hansen, and it was impossible, I didn't get any replies to emails. I was in New York at the Earth Institute on Broadway near Columbia University, and I met a friend, and we were walking down Broadway to look for a restaurant to eat. And we passed one restaurant, and I was drawn through the open. I said, "This is the one." We walked in, and it was empty. I said, "Let's go to the back." We walked to the back, we're sitting down, and there's Dr. Hansen across the aisle talking with two young people. And so I said to my friend, "Please just stay here, don't ask questions." And I got up and I stood a polite distance away with my hands folded in front of me until he had to see me and acknowledge me. And he finally said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Dr. Hansen, I've been trying to get in touch with you for years." And I had my 30-second elevator pitch, my opportunity. And he said, "I'm very interested, but I will ignore your email unless we arrange for something in the subject line that I will note." So we put a token in the subject line, and that became a relationship that we now have. And as for Greta Thunberg, there's another story there. Not only did I have Greta Thunberg on my program, by the way, it's morphed, it's evolved from Climate Matters TV to Scientists Warning TV, and now it's Facing Future TV. But when we were Scientists Warning TV, I was introduced to Greta Thunberg through her father, and I talked him into driving down to Poland to bring her to COP24 in
To which,
Katowice.
yeah.
And I told him when we met in Stockholm, where I was due to give a presentation anyhow, he came to the place I was staying. We met for a couple of hours. I told him I was going to have Greta on 4 times so that every journalist there would have an opportunity to see her, if not to interview her. So I was the one who invited Greta Thunberg to the COP. I gave her and her father badges for week 1, and the Secretary General gave them badges for week 2. Now, when you look at when you watch the movie I Am Greta, that fact is obscured, and they make it seem like the UN invited her, which is not the case. If you look, you'll see them hurrying down the hall in one scene, and he's saying, "Come on, we're late." They were late to one of my press conferences, one of my programs, TV programs.
I'm so glad you're letting us know that story. I know the story, and it's a special way that she got into the cops, and also was on your episode and show, which you have recorded, which you still play and is getting numerous views. There is a transition. The other transition is you were on We Don't Have Time in Stockholm in Sweden for Ingmar Rindholtz, who's actually one of the gentlemen, also a climate reality leader that we kind of know from those circle, who actually was there, who went out on to the parliament and spoke with Greta and helped her in a lot of ways to move forward. So,
Ingmar was my introduction to Greta.
yeah,
His We Don't Have Time made contact. Someone from his organization passed her the very first day she was sitting outside the parliament with her sign, mostly being ignored by people. She was just sitting kind of, and he immediately went back with the cameraman and said, "May we interview you in English?" And they did a short interview that gave her, I call it, they launched her in the booster, in the first stage rocket. And so she began to get interviews on the street. And he introduced me to her, and I brought her to the UN, and that basically launched her into orbit. But she has matured from the 15-year-old who was already speaking truth to elders. She was already more knowledgeable than 95% of the people who attend the climate talks. And now, 2 years later, she's refined her I hesitate to call it pitch. She's refined her bank of information so much that she can go toe to toe with any denier, anyone in the world. I would hazard a guess.
Is it George Moffat, also Johann Rockstrom, and many others have really helped her education, given her departed other wisdoms, and been a real learning lesson. Not only she sought out herself for that knowledge, but also some great collaborations.
Kevin
Um,
Anderson. Kevin Anderson was a major.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can hear his voice or his ideas. And I like to think that I influenced her also, because very soon after her appearance on my programs, and every program I do, I insert my thing about how money has come to own us. We no longer control money, it controls us. It's a meme. And she picked up on that. And so now she has integrated into her offering that it's our economic system that's killing us and the system has to change.
yeah, that's so true. I mean, wanted my listeners to kind of get that depth of some of the guests you've had, some of those you have. Those who don't know who Dr. James Hansen is the former Goddard Institute of NASA chief scientist. And
Yes.
in Al Gore's presentations at the beginning kind of says, when I first started, when you first started in the presentations, it was 300,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs going off every single day. That number has since been updated to 500,000 going off every single day. And that's some of the data that comes from Dr. James Hansen and many other things. He's a advocate for the climate. And you also had his granddaughter on the show with him. I think it was the second time that he was there together with you, as well as I think we're trying to get Severin Suzuki as well, who was suing the United States, and I think still is, or still going through that process with a
Severin
group.
Suzuki
Yeah.
is, we should detail that a little bit more. She, at the age of 12 or 13, journeyed all the way down to Rio de Janeiro for the initial Rio summit, out of which the climate talks sprang. The Kyoto Protocols were a response to the recognition that climate was a problem. And at the summit, the Rio summit, she and four of her friends raised money, paid their own way to go down to Rio. And she gave a talk that it's known as the girl who stopped the world for 5 minutes. And she gave an intervention which was just mind boggling. It's on my channel as well. It's been listed on many channels. And if you put them all together, it's probably been viewed 100 million times or
Yeah,
more.
at least, at the very least. Yeah, it's amazing.
Actually,
I still talk about her today. She's amazing. And she was just on recently on the new TED combination with the United Nations, their new release during the pandemic, where she kind of gave us an update and said she's still alive and kicking, still active in climate, and nothing has changed. We have to do more than double down, and said some very strong words. And so there's just a group of amazing people you've spoken to, but that's not it. You've been at this for a while, and maybe you want to even go back a little bit more and give us some insights of maybe how you first got into doing events on in the press area, in the secure zone, the blue zone of the United Nations Conference of the Parties, the COPs events, and then other United Nations events that you spoke or have interacted in. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you initially pushed in that direction, got in that direction, and then kind of some things that you've seen and learned and experienced over the time?
At a very young age. You could even say when I was in my mom's belly and they named me Stuart. In my career, which spanned information technology, that is IT, and financial, I worked for Merrill Lynch as a what we call a stockbroker. But I've worked in various things, and there's always been a thread of wanting to make the environmental more important. And so when I worked for Merrill Lynch, I was the first, as far as I know, I was the first environmentalist stockbroker on Wall Street. And I put it out publicly at an Earth Day gathering in New York. I said, this is my interest. If you have the same interest, please get in touch. And Merrill Lynch, their lawyer said, you went just about as far as you could go without getting us in trouble and you in trouble yourself. Because I was not offering information. I didn't have the information. I was soliciting interest. And I went into my boss's office. 20% of the flyers that I had turned out were returned to me with expressions of interest. And I got 20% back, which is beyond anything that you usually get back. So my manager said, that's a great idea, but you can't do it at Merrill Lynch. Why not? Because we are the thundering herd. And if we recommended one of those pure plays in environmental remediation, we would blow their stock out of the water on the upside or the downside. You can't do it here. So I quit Merrill Lynch and I went on to that same kind of thing, kept expressing itself. Whatever job I had, I was thinking, how do I benefit the planet? Finally, in 2008, I was teaching college, and I decided I was going to go to the COP. The university I was teaching at, or the college, it was not a full-on university, was going out of business because of financial mismanagement. And I said, if I cover my classes, may I leave a bit early and go to the climate talks? They said, okay. I had to get into the climate talks, but I made a contact with the NGO liaison who told me how to do it, even
How
though
to
I
work
missed.
the system.
Well, she knew how. She knew how I could still get in, and I did. And I didn't know that first year I went. It was in Poznan, Poland, and I did not know what I was supposed to do. But I went with two objectives: one very specific and one very general. The specific one is that I wanted to go to a press conference that the negotiator for the American negotiating team would give, and I wanted to cut him off at the knees because it was the last COP, Conference of Parties, that the George W. Bush administration would control the negotiations. And the lead negotiator was an oil company lobbyist. So his name was Dr. Harlan Watson. And I succeeded in going to the press conference that he gave. And I was first in line at the mic. And I asked a question that did not need to be answered. I'd already cut him off at the knees with the statement of the question. The other programmatic idea was I was there to help any NGO, non-governmental organization, who was on the right side, that is, was pro-life, pro-negotiations. Any organization like that, I would help them in any way I could. And then I started finding ways to help, and that evolved into a place where I was very well known, knew a lot of people, and was allowed to do things, was told how to get around rules, how to work within the rules, to do things that no one else does. As far as I know, I'm the only person who's ever been given permission to hand bill at a UN climate talks.
Yeah, yeah.
I was there for 10 seconds. And the guard stopped me and said, you can't do that. And I said, I have permission from Megumi Endo. And he called her up and he said, I don't know how you did it, but sure enough, she said, you can do it.
That's fabulous, and that's the Stuart I know and I love, and I'm so glad that you're still at it, and you're continuing to think about the future of further COPs, especially continuing with Dr. James Hansen and other greats on the show now as it continues to evolve. And you alluded to it earlier, but I want to go just a tad bit deeper into it. So this pandemic, however horrific, has been a horrific, wonderful movement for climate, bubbling the problems to the surface, shining a microscope on things, and really making a shift in awareness. And a lot of people saying they were right, or we've got to change our plan. There's got to be a different system and out there. And so when the year before the pandemic, when the year started out for me, I don't know how it was for you, but it started out as a bang. Companies, corporations, organizations were doing more than doubling down. They were making big ambitions, big goals, big movements, making big shifts. And it was the decade of action. It still is the decade of action. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. But it really took off, and I was like, now we've put our foot on the exponential roadmap, and it's looking pretty positive. Then the pandemic, and I think it was in retrospect a very positive thing what had happened. And so that's also that question: how have you weathered this time? How has that also been with your circles and what you're working on now, what you're seeing moving forward? Was it a similar type of cases and stories for you?
How I'm working with the opportunity that we've been given. And I remember one of the many things I got from my involvement with Al Gore. One of the things I learned from him was that the Chinese character for catastrophe, or I think it's the equivalent of disaster, is a combination of danger and opportunity. So we have a pandemic now, which is both a danger and an opportunity. And the opportunity is that we may emerge from this with a different economic playbook. And so, how I'm working with that is, thank you, God, I've been given an opportunity through a 12-year process of courting a relationship with the Vatican. I've been given an opportunity to place an intern from the School of Ecological Economics. There are other forms of economics, and the one that I'm banking on, and I'll use that word intentionally, the one that I'm banking on is ecological economics, which was founded by Dr. Herman Daly, D-A-L-Y. And I encourage listeners to look that up. But I've been invited essentially to create a conduit between the wisdom from the School of Ecological Economics and the Holy See.
That's beautiful.
So the Pope, hopefully, will be messaging more clearly about how we need to change our economic system in order to benefit humanity and in order to benefit life on Earth. Because it ain't all about us. It's what it's all about is life, and we are being part of life.
That's beautiful. And I love to hear that work. And it is a huge opportunity for us not to go back to normal, to the new normal. This is more than the Great Reset, than even the World Economic Forum is saying. I do, I do a lot around food and agriculture, and it's around the world. It's not just the United States. There's too many lobbyists that are pushing those industries with the politicians that have allowed so much corruption, so much bad practice and things to get in. In 2008, the entire world shifted and financial markets and investments to anything to do with the food systems. And at that shift, it turned food systems into a commodity. And when you commoditize food, then you cheapen food, which when you cheapen food, you cheapen life. And and it's just a horrible down spiral ripple effect
Right.
that is so awful that the people who are interested in food systems now as a commodity have no idea what goes into food and how it's produced, and therefore what are we going to get? The cheapest food. And it doesn't matter if there's, you know, radiation or
Toxins. Right.
toxins in there, as long as it's cheap. But then you've cheapened life, and you've messed up so many other
Yes.
things in life. And so,
And that feeds into a corrupt medical system, corrupt in that the Western medical system, again, it's run by money. So the insurance industry makes out like bandits. The medical industry makes out like bandits. The food industry doesn't care what they're feeding you because they make out like bandits. And as you said, when a commodity that we consume becomes a matter of what is cheapest, you get everything that breaks or breaks you. It's quite tragic what the playbook that money has created has done to society.
well, we don't know. We have some great people. Well, I believe it was the same. It was at COP24 in Katowice when the Climate Change Coalition was first accepted into the UN, and then they started doing some actions and having some organizations or interagencies of the UN really start to look at distributed ledger technology, blockchain. It's a late start, but now that momentum is getting more and more, and hopefully we can come up with some emerging technologies, some solutions that are really better systems. I know your travels. I know enough about you to be dangerous, but I want to ask regardless, are you a global citizen, and how would you feel about a world without nations, borders, divisions of humanity, one from another? And can you give us a little bit more insights and feelings of your understanding of this concept, especially in this year of this pandemic, where the pandemic's been a global citizen, food's been a global citizen, and species that travel across nations and borders, air, water, it's all been a global citizen. But the human beast, has been in lockdown, and we're not a global citizen, and we're being divided with nationalistic fervor and divided amongst each other.
In any case, the question was about global government, one world government. I believe very strongly that if we could do that, if we could have all nations submit their sovereignty to a world government, it would benefit us if the means by which we governed, the means by which we authorized and implemented were correct, were proper, and it wasn't a wealthy elite that could be bought into that could buy their way into power. If it was a citizen directed government, I know Extinction Rebellion has a proposal out for this, but they are saying the government should be composed of people who are selected almost randomly and to sit on a panel, a council, and an advisory panel or council. I feel strongly that something like that needs to happen. And if it doesn't, then I pity the next generation. I pity them.
Yeah,
They're going to go through hard times anyhow. But if we emerge from the pandemic with business as usual, with the rich old guys, mostly guys, the good old buddies running the show, and it's not I want to say again, it's not the presidents and prime ministers who run the show. It's the central banks that run the show. And I'll quote for the third time in 3 days, I'll quote Meyer Rothschild, the patriarch of the famous banking family from Switzerland. Meyer Rothschild once said, "Give me the power to create the money of a nation, and I care not who makes the laws."
Yep.
So it's money via the central banks that controls our governance. We have to eliminate that. We have to prevent governance from enriching those who govern, and we have to keep governance away from the already wealthy, unless they are randomly drawn to be part of this citizens' assembly.
I believe there's so many models out there that are positively beginning to emerge, different economic models, different operating systems that are more of a global governance. Back when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, there was, this big fear of the new world order and, this a form of a global governance, and even talks about the United Nations and crazy things that the UN was trying to do.
Well, I don't know that the United Nations would be the proper organization for this global governance. Because the United Nations is under the influence of neoclassical growth economics. If
Yeah.
you take a look at the sustainability goals,
Yeah.
they had to be
Economic
approved
growth.
by the banks.
Yeah.
Number 8
Number
is
8.
good jobs and economic growth.
Yeah.
Now, they cover their butts by saying economic growth for the underdeveloped nations that need to grow their economic systems to raise their populations out of poverty. And I say that that concept is a worthy one.
I always like to say decent work and sustainable economic growth.
Yeah.
I'm a big,
There is no
19.
such thing.
Yeah,
There's no
there
such
is.
thing.
It's an oxymoron.
It's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. Nothing organic can grow forever within a finite container. And the last time I checked, the earth was a finite container.